Alright guys, so today in this video, basically I just wanted to talk about, if you're ever thinking about what substrate should you use for your gargoyle geckos, and give my experience and what I think about the different substrates and the pros and cons of each one. And I have with me, this is Cayenne as well. She is my red base breeder female. So I'll get right into it. So I'm gonna rate these based out of 3 categories from a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is the best, 1 is the worst. The categories are affordability. Obviously that's important, especially if you have many reptiles. The second category is the humidity retention, which is something that's important because of the type of reptiles it's for, gargoyle geckos. And then the third thing is the maintenance. Depending on what your schedule is and stuff like that, that could be important as well, because the more maintenance, the more time you have to put into it. So first thing I'm gonna start off is probably the most popular, which is paper towels. This is what I use for about 90% of my enclosures. So it pretty much is my #1 preference. And then the other thing too, all this stuff is just personal opinion, but these are my favorite. I rate them on an affordability scale at a 9. The reason I give it a 9 is just because if it was 10, they would be free. You can pick them up pretty much at any store, a gas station, a dollar store, the grocery store, wherever. And as long as you aren't getting like name brand paper towel, you just need to get the cheapest kind possible. It won't cost a lot of money and you can get a decent amount for not much at all. So for the affordability, it gets a 9. Second thing, the humidity retention. Now the thing about paper towels is typically you experience, as long as you provide enough ventilation in the enclosures, they're gonna dry out by the end of the night, as long as you don't soak them down, super wet. So when it comes to humidity retention, I give them a 6, just because they do their job. They do enough in terms of the humidity and everything, but this is something that you wouldn't be able to go, multiple days in a row without spraying the enclosure in order to maintain the humidity that you need to. The paper towels will fluctuate a lot where, as you spray them, they're good, but usually by the morning, as long as you didn't soak them down like super wet, usually by the morning, they're completely dried out. Not completely, but they're almost dried out for there. So that's why I give it a 6. And then the third category is the maintenance, and I give it a 4. The reason being is just because these can get dirty easily, and whenever you do have to maintain it, if you have, a huge adult enclosure that is requiring, like this much worth of paper towels, well, whenever you go to clean it, you have to replace everything. Chances are you're gonna have to do that probably about once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on how dirty they get. Just because for paper towels, like poop, dirt, their food, stuff like that, it's gonna stay there. And you can't really have any bioactive on a paper towel because no isopods or springtails or anything are gonna live in there. So in terms of the maintenance, I give it a 4. And that puts it at an overall score of 19 out of 30. Now, like I said, this is what I use for about 90% of my enclosures. At the end of the day, it comes down to your personal preference. Every different substrate has its pro and con. It's just whatever you personally would want to deal with for that. The second substrate that I'm going to talk about is cypress mulch. Common brand of it is the forest floor bedding, and it's like basically light colored pieces of mulch is all it looks like, that you would see outside, but it's just like a white color to it. Now, I do have this in some of my enclosures. It's something that I tried out. However, you'll see in the scores and stuff, I personally I wouldn't choose it as my number one, or, completely change my whole husbandry and put this in every single enclosure. Now, for the cypress mulch, I put the affordability as a 6, because you can see here the price for a bag. It's still affordable. However, it is not obviously as cheap as paper towels. Paper towels are going to be the most affordable out of all of them. And just because you can get a lot more paper towels with a less amount of money, when they sell them in those huge rolls of, 12, that huge pack of like 12 rolls in it, where the cypress mulch, you're only dealing with bags. And especially if you're using adult enclosures, you might use maybe one bag per enclosure, or a half a bag per enclosure. So if you have a bunch of enclosures, you're gonna need multiple bags of it. So that's why I gave it a 6. Now for the humidity, I give it a 5. The reason being is because same thing as the paper towels, where it seemed like it really would dry out overnight. The reason I give it a 5 is because the paper towel does absorb the moisture, where the cypress mulch just seems to, you spray it and it doesn't do a really good job of absorbing the water. So that's why I give it a 5 in terms of humidity. Still all manageable. You're just gonna have to put a little bit more time and care into making sure that you do maintain that humidity. And for the maintenance, I give it a 7. The reason being is because if they poop, in that substrate, you don't have to replace everything like you would with a paper towel. All you have to do is just replace that little patch wherever it's at. You can just scoop it out and throw it away. So that's why I give it a 7. And that gives it an overall score of 18 out of 30. The next type of substrate is right here, some Eco Earth, another popular substrate with just reptiles and animals in general. Now, the reason this is still in the package is because I don't use it. I will use it for, lay boxes, but they'll have, usually the lay boxes will have like moss mixed in with it, or other projects or something that I would need this dirt for, but I do not use it personally as a substrate for my enclosures. Now, on the affordability scale, I give it a 7. The reason being is because you can get this, which is compressed. It's cheaper. You get more than buying the bags. You can get this for about $14, $15. And this will expand into a ton of Eco Earth. So this, if you don't have a ton of enclosures, would last you a pretty long time if you decided to use it. So that's why I give it a 7 out of 10. Now, on the next scale for the humidity, I give this one a 4 out of 10. The reason being is because in my experience, this is the hardest to get to maintain moisture. Unless, when you soak these and you're expanding them with the water, unless you always keep it moist from the day you do that till the day you get rid of it, it seems like it's a bit hydrophobic whenever you mix in water. For example, that's the reason I put the moss into the lay boxes on top of this. It's because the moss really helps absorb the water. Where if I just had a lay box of this and I poured water into it, you would actually see, if you ever tried, or maybe I'll make a video or something to show you, that the water will actually just go to the bottom of the container that you have it in, and this will float on the top. So it doesn't absorb it. It basically just sits there with it along with the water, which is an issue. And the reason being is because overnight and stuff like that, in my experience, it's dried out. So then you go to spray it the next day and the water is sitting on top of it. And I've never had this happen to me, but I do know someone that gave me some advice on not to use that, just because since it dries out so fast, the next time that they sprayed water in their enclosure, the water made the dirt stick to the skin of their geckos. Then when it came to shedding, it actually gave them some serious shedding problems. So that's another reason I don't use this at all. That's another reason for the humidity. It does get a 4. Now for on the maintenance, this is a 7 as well, just because the same thing, you can scoop stuff out and then just throw it away versus replacing the whole entire enclosure with this. And it gets another 7 as well. It gets that 7 as well, because if you do, let's just say you do mix it with moss, or you're using it into like a bioactive enclosure like back there, which has a bunch of other substrates mixed in, it can be helpful with like isopods, springtails, they can live in there. So that's why it gets a 7 as well, just because if they're living there, they'll help clean up waste as well, and they can't live on paper towels. So its overall score is an 18 out of 30, the same as the cypress mulch, but they just have scores in different areas. And the fourth and final substrate that I'm going to be talking about is this Repti bark, which is the bark of fir trees that's chopped up. Here, I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like what you would see, outside, but instead of it being the mulch, like the cypress mulch, it really just looks like what it is, which is chopped up pieces of bark. So this is one that I do enjoy. Again, with personal preference for everything, because I still use paper towels for 90% of my enclosures. However, if I had to choose, if paper towels weren't an option, then I would choose the Repti bark. So for the affordability, that's the main thing that it is dropped in. It gets a 5 because it is the most expensive out of all of them. This bag right here, which is definitely less volume than this, is about $27. And one bag is good for about one adult enclosure, and you'll have a little bit left over, as you can see at the bottom, which you have to get another bag anyways if you want to fully put it, have a full amount for adult enclosure for the substrate. So for the affordability, it gets a 5 out of 10, just because you need a decent bit of it, and it is the most expensive out of all of the substrates. For the humidity, this actually gets an 8 out of 10. The reason being is because, in my experience, this maintains the humidity the most, to the point where you actually sometimes have to be careful on overspraying or spraying too often, because even a full 24 hours, I will go, getting ready for the night, going to spray everyone down, and the substrate is still moist. So with this, the only thing you want to make sure of is there's proper ventilation in the enclosure, and that you aren't overspraying it as well, because it gets an 8 out of 10 because it maintains the most amount of humidity of all of them. So it's a little bit more finicky, which could be honestly a bad thing, but I put the scale 1 to 10 of how well it does maintain that humidity. So that's why the ReptiBark gets an 8 out of 10. And for the maintenance, it is an 8 out of 10 as well. The reason being is because it maintains a higher humidity, it is more conducive to having isopods or springtails in there. Especially certain species that might like a more humid living area. That helps out. The other cypress mulch and the eco earth, just because they dry out a lot faster, it could prevent a sustainable colony of isopods or springtails in there. So the maintenance gets an 8 out of 10, just because like the other eco earth and cypress mulch, if there's poop or anything, one area, you could just pick it out and throw it away versus replacing the whole entire thing. And it definitely can help, with if you add in isopods, springtails, stuff like that, that can help reduce your amount of maintenance. And because it maintains more humidity, it's a little bit easier to get those springtails or isopods to thrive in it. So for the total score of the ReptiBark is a 21 out of 30, which actually gives it the highest score out of all of the substrates. Now, you can also, at the end of the day, it really just comes down to personal preference, because you could also create, 100 other categories that might make you prefer one or the other. But in terms of like the 3 main categories that would apply to your geckos, the ReptiBark does get the highest score. However, everybody, I wouldn't say then you should go out and buy it and switch all of your enclosures to it, because then it does mean you may have to rebuild some enclosures and put more ventilation in it. It does mean you may have to, redo your schedule for how you're spraying them down. So at the end of the day, it is personal preference. Some definitely can make your life easier than others, but even though it didn't get the high score, I still use paper towels just because of accessibility. You can get them anywhere. You don't have to go to a pet store. You don't have to go to, order them online and wait for it to get here. You don't have to go to a reptile expo. I can get them at a gas station. And the humidity, it's a good amount for the way I have my enclosures set up, where I'm used to being able to spray them and it lasting the whole day, and the next day going and spraying them as well. And the other main reason I like using paper towels is because it's easy to monitor your animals. Certain issues can be seen in the poop. So if their poop is blended in or being eaten by isopods or springtails and being blended into the substrate, it can make it harder for you to notice if something is wrong. And another reason why I personally use 90% in all my enclosures the paper towels, because if you have a female that is breeding, sometimes I've had it happen, if you have substrate that is like the ReptiBark, if it's deep enough, sometimes they'll lay their eggs in the substrate versus a lay box, which could possibly prevent you from seeing the eggs and then potentially losing the eggs as well. So this is another reason why I use the paper towels, because then I have the lay box in there, and then it basically pushes them to use the lay box versus just the ground outside. So there you guys have it. Hopefully some of that info can help you, decide which substrate that you would want to use. At the end of the day, it really is just personal preference. So, go with whatever you would want to go with. And what is working for you, most importantly. I wouldn't switch up if you're having success with one substrate, but I would consider others if you are struggling with one and you haven't tried any others. So hopefully this helps, guys. thank you so much for all the support and the views and the subscribers. It means a lot just because I'm just doing this, you know, not as an intention to try to blow up on here and, you know, make a bunch of money or anything from this, but just purely because of the passion that I have for the animals, and, you know, part of my goals in terms of breeding and stuff, and be able to share that and pass that information along to other people as well. So I really appreciate the support. As always, if you have any questions, you can ask anyone that's ever messaged me before. You know, I will answer you and help you out. So if you need anything, you can reach me. Number one place is Instagram at Red Rack, and that's where you can see all my other collection as well. Currently, right now, I haven't sold any babies at all from this whole year. Expect them to be sold either, you know, if something changes and I need to get rid of them, then, I mean, that could be any time though. Then expect them then. But my plan is to raise as many as possible as I can over the winter to make sure to get as many well started and to be able to prove out certain genetics that I'm working with, or looks, I would rather say, that I'm trying to achieve. And with Gargs, the color development comes with time, so that's why I've just been holding on to a ton. But stay tuned, you know, stay in touch, because that's where I will be posting anything I do have for sale on my Instagram. But again, thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. If you have any suggestions, drop it in a comment down below. Thanks. If you need anything, just reach out.